Hello, hello, hello. Welcome with me, if you will, to Wider Circles, Ted Jauw. Ted is a author, a blogger, priest, activist, father of seven, grandfather. He and his wife Kate are working on the sequel to Absinthe, Alewives Alchemy. He's working on the prequel to how he became Baba Teddy, which is how most people know him. Welcome, Ted.
Thank you. It's great to be here, or it's great to be anywhere, actually, even if it's just virtually.
Right. Absolutely. I think as far as staying in place, you're one of the people that's been about as strict as I have been.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm pretty much a monk these days, except that I have a wife and children. I'm not good at being ascetic, but I have probably the CDC has a list of 13 things that you are not allowed to have and go out in public, and I have 12 of them. And I'm not pregnant yet, but I'm working on the 13th one. So that's my one COVID-19 joke. It's like I get to say that once every 3 months. So,
right.
you know.
It's not a bad one. And watch when we move into 2021, there's going to
Yeah,
be
yeah,
a plus sign
yeah,
on the stick. So there'll be a birth announcement.
yeah.
But I mean, I'm sure you'll be a high risk pregnancy, but that's
I
okay.
will be a high risk pregnancy, and that child is in danger of just I mean, all my other children have issues, but that one especially.
Look where we've started
Yeah,
things.
that's right. Well, we have only up to go from here. So,
So, what's been keeping you busy?
um, actually, virus-related activities. Our um, our situation in life is actually really good, given all of the circumstances. But Kate is able to be at home. She is a teacher for disabled and mentally impaired adults during the day. And so she's been home and working from home, as well as at the beginning, we received our little checks from the government and things. And so we've been restoring the home that we bought many years ago, and have not had the time. Like you, we are out on the road most of the year, and at conventions and at fairs and gatherings and music festivals, doing all sorts of things, and we haven't gone anywhere. Typically from June to October, we're never home, and now we're home all the time. So we're restoring a 1910 Spanish stucco um, craftsman house. It's really more of an arts and craftsman house in the ghetto in Grand Rapids, and so we're very happy here, and have been making sawdust and painting and putting all the built-ins back and restoring the interior of the house back to what it was 110 years ago. And then writing and doing these kinds of things. I think that my family um, has stock in Zoom, and that's probably the only way we're going to be sustainable. Is had we been smart enough to buy a piece of Zoom, but we didn't, and so
Right.
so we're just going to have to work for a living, and that's part of what we're doing now, is figuring out what that means and what that looks like, and but also we've had time to write, and so I write quite a bit. And both doing research for the books that we're talking about, but also I write politically. Uh,
Hmm.
so I'm a political blogger, and have been pretty prolific. There's a lot to write about these days. So
Definitely.
yeah,
So I think we'll come back to some of the books and talk a little bit, do a little bit deeper dive on some of that in a little bit. But right now, why don't we go way back, and talk about your origin story, your
All right.
early life, this
Well,
foundation that makes
yeah.
that brought us Ted.
Well, I have a really eclectic spiritual background because I have a really eclectic ancestral background. And so I was born in San Francisco just months after my parents came to the States from the Netherlands as refugees. And they were not refugees, they were escapees from Indonesia. Um, and so the massive genocide that was happening there in the 40s and 50s, anybody with a connection to the Dutch government was allowed to escape, and so my mother and father both ended up in the ghettos in the Netherlands, and because this is weird, because my mom was raised by my dad's mother, um, he got to meet her. And so he actually was not raised by his own mother. And so when they were reunited in the Netherlands, uh, uh, that's where my mom and dad met. And then that's where I came about. And she was pregnant coming over. And I was born soon after that. Um,
Mm.
and so that's the nativity story. And and so my parents were at various times. I have to preface this by saying that my dad was insane, and so at times we were Dutch Reformed because that was the church that sponsored us to the United States, here in Grand Rapids, actually, where there's a lot of Dutch people. And and we were also reformed and fundamentalist and evangelical. And um, my dad got really sick when I was about 5, and then we moved to Michigan, where the rest of our family had settled. So there's kind of an Indonesian enclave here, but it's really not a community. We really all are here, but we pretend to be Dutch or Chinese or whatever we can pass as, because um, nobody is proud of being Indonesian that's here as a refugee. And so there's lots and lots of us, but you just wouldn't know it because we're all pretending to be something else. And also because, like Americans, saying you're Indonesian really means um, you're mixed. And so most in the Netherlands, you would say you're an Indo, and an Indo is like saying you're Métis or mestizo. It means you're mixed blooded, which in Indonesia before the war, they could actually kill you. If you were a mixed blood, they could kill you. And so now it's kind of like the N word, we've reclaimed it. And so we say things like
Hmm.
Indo, please. Um, and that's sort of like my growing up. That meant what that meant was I didn't have an identity. Our parents really wanted us to assimilate um, to whatever the highest caste could possibly be, and so they they wanted us to be as white as possible, if you look at it that way. But my dad was
Mm-hmm.
ethnically Mandarin, Chinese, but mixed for hundreds of years with Indonesian, other Indonesian things. And then my mom was from the other side of the islands, and uh, her mother was Moluccan and her father was Dutch, and then they were mixed with all different kinds. I mean, the more we study into it, the more we realize, my Dutch grandfather was dark Dutch, which meant that he was actually Gitane, Roma, Gypsy. So they call that Black Forest German or Dark Dutch,
Hmm.
and so they were. He was a colonial in Indonesia, and then my mom's family was Moluccan, but that meant that they were also very, very, very mixed. So we now know that Ternate, where my grandmother and grandfather come from, was the island where the slave ships from Ghana, from the Ghana prison, disembarked, and so a lot of the population there has Black Nigerian or Yoruba blood. So I was told in a divination many, many, many years ago that I'm actually part Black, and I didn't know that until my grandmother on my father's side actually told me that my other grandmother, her best friend, was was Black, and that our family wouldn't admit that. And so I have a mixed background that's like that, and it's reflected in my spiritual beliefs, starting with being an atheist, um, and uh, and essentially, daring God to show Himself, and then going through a period where essentially I realized that I was really not an atheist. I spent a week with Carl Sagan. The Hold on, there's actually somebody delivering my Amazon. They actually knock now. They usually don't. Only when I'm recording. So so the deal is that I spent a week with Carl Sagan, and we talked a lot about his atheism. I drove him around at a time in college when I didn't actually have a license. I was driving illegally, um, and so um, and so he
I'm
had a
familiar
whole
with it.
week. He had a whole week to spend here, to do these different things. The Gerald R. Ford Museum is here, and so he was here in conjunction with that, um, and and the space part of the museum. And so I spent a whole week with him and realized that he was, as a fellow atheist, was way, way more spiritual than I ever imagined, and probably even to this day is the most spiritually deep man I've ever met. But he posed so many questions to me about what it meant to be an atheist, that as a scientist, both him and I, it's hard to be skeptical and yet have already presupposed a position that there is no God. And so he was the first person to pose that to me, and I have to start to redefine what atheism and agnosticism actually meant. And I did that from a scientific point of view, but also at that point, things started happening in my life. And so um, I lived with a woman who had all kinds of paranormal things that would happen to her. And it sort of changed my whole worldview of what was real and what was not real, um, to the point of one day waking up next to her, and I thought that she had like pressed her palms of her hands into my eyes and was sitting on me. And when I finally was able to pull my eyes open, realized that she was sound asleep next to me, and there was something on top of me, um, that was that was that had their palms of their hands on my eyes. And when I pulled it off, they started choking me, and I started to have a fight with something that wasn't there. From that point on, for months and months and months, all kinds of paranormal things happened around her mostly, but I was with her all of the time. And um, the following day, it escalated, and um, we were sitting watching television, and all of a sudden in the kitchen, we were house sitting, and the cupboards all flew open one at a time, and pots and pans and boxes and cans all started flying out. And then finally, a heavy cast iron pan just floated out into the middle of the kitchen, and it just stood there in the middle of the air, like with nothing, and then it
Hmm.
dropped. and all the doors slammed shut at once, and so it's hard to be an atheist when you start seeing things with your own eyes and stuff, and it escalated from there. And so uh, in an effort to figure out what was going on, was when I started going to psychic fairs and bookstores, and really looking for things and really not finding things. And then at one point, they just started to find me. And for about a 1 year period in my life, people would come up, different people, and would say, "You don't know me, but I know you, you're marked." They would say something like that. And then from that point on, it, I would hear stuff from them. They would tell me stuff about me, or they would lead me somewhere, or they would show me somebody or something. Um, and that happened for quite a long time until I got into a very, very serious car accident, and they had to reassemble my right femur, and they were going to put a rod in it. But being Indonesian, my bones are so small and skinny that the thinnest metal rod that they had wouldn't fit. And so they actually put me deeper into anesthesia and went to a metal shop, like a regular metal shop, and retooled this metal rod. And it took them
Wow.
about 7 hours to do that. But in the middle of that, I actually flatlined and died, and
Oh,
watched myself die, and then watched them wheel me out into the hallway and disconnect me from everything, and then do CPR out in the hallway. I found out later on that it was because they didn't want any of that on tape, uh, and have no record of any of that. So there's like a serious hour-and-a-half gap in all of the records related to that incident. Uh, but it turns out that that was the second time that I died, and I didn't remember the first time until I died the second time. And just soon after that, as I was recovering, I realized that I could look at people and just know stuff about them. I wouldn't see
mhm.
it. I wouldn't hear anything. I don't have that kind of sight or anything. I still don't to this day. I just open my mouth and stuff comes out. And then it got worse and worse to the point where if somebody touched me, everything about them would just like fill up inside of me, and I would know everything about them. And um, so I've spent the last, that was 85. And so I've spent the last 35 years, A, trying to control that, and B, really learning how to appreciate that, to use that, to suppress it when I need to, and also finding out what that means about me. It really, really, really pointed to the amount of healing and other things that I needed for myself. So it's not like I died so I could save the world. I really died so that I could save myself. And in doing so, I found that I had reasons to live, and gifts to have and use, and stories to tell, like that one.
Threads to weave, right?
Yes, yes. So, and that's sort of the Reader's Digest version. So that takes you up to 1985 or six.
Okay.
And so, and I'm writing now about the period after that. And so the prequel to Kate and my book, uh, our current book, is really about, ooh, dead bodies hit the floor upstairs. I don't know what they're doing up there, but you might want to edit that part out, because the timestamp will mean that somebody does not have an alibi, except for me. I'm sitting here talking to
Right, you
you,
do.
and
You
you're
do.
my
No,
alibi, and
right. It's staying in. You need an alibi.
right,
Yeah.
right, and so you're the best eyewitness I've ever had. And so, um, so, so so my life after that point became just an endless stream of synchronicities, and meeting teachers, and meeting and actually mostly running away from all of that. I don't think that that was something that I ever really I didn't aspire to be myself,
Mm,
but this is who I am, and this is what I have to this is what I have to work with, and that
right.
includes all of the people and things that came into my life after that period of time.
Hmm. So, well, that was your origin story that took us up. You mentioned the prequel and
Yes,
it starting at about this time. So I'm kind of curious as to like some of these teachers that you've
yeah,
worked with, some of them that you've apprenticed under, and it sounds like that this might be some of the material that's touched on in the
it
prequel.
it is. I think that at a certain point that one of the things that saved me. Uh, and it helped me give me a framework to understand what was going on with me and in my life was I had many friends here in Grand Rapids who belonged to a cult. And I say that in an anthropological sense, but I also say that in the sort of waggish sense that you might think. Um, there was a man named Harley Swiftier who ran a, a sort of Native American New Age metaphysical organization slash well, it was a cult that um, that used Mayan mythology and Mayan medicine wheels as well as Native American practices that came out of Central America. And he was a contemporary of Carlos Castaneda and knew him uh, at Esalen in Big Sur. And it was through that group of people that I met Harley Swiftier, and through Harley Swiftier, I met many of the teachers that gravitated around him, that were either apprentices of his or were studying him or studying with him, or that were his contemporaries. And so through him, um, I, um, I knew, uh, now I forgot all of their names. I knew the, I forget her name now. Um, anyway, she was an anthropologist who studied all of these great Native American teachers, and through her and through Swiftier, I met my first teacher, Mary Loomis, who was a Jungian psychoanalyst and who was studying how mandalas and medicine wheels preserved knowledge,
Mm,
and also how they were universal and related to storytelling, and that storytelling was a universal way to encode not information necessarily, but archetypal energies and philosophies and thoughts and things. So she was my first main teacher. Um, and at that same time, I had a Native American uh, teacher whose name was Mato Chikala Swan, who was a Lakota Blackfoot and partially German um, woman who was a militant lesbian witch who who studied for 8 years with the Zazen as they helped her recover from heroin and cocaine addiction that she developed after she was an Olympic archer. And then Carter pulled us out of the Olympics. She had made the team, and then we got pulled out of the Olympics, and she went into a spiral and was saved by the Zazen in Japan. So she was my Native American um, uh, Zazen uh, militant lesbian warrior, hates men teacher, uh, and I was her only male apprentice, and so she took me on as apprentice to help heal her her hatred for toxic masculinity. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was the living metaphor of toxic masculinity for several years, uh, and I lived up
In
to
the
that.
present, I wouldn't say that would be our experience with you at all. So,
Yeah. Well, I've evolved a little bit, and seriously, she was also an addiction counselor, and so at that same time, I was beginning to understand that even though, um, you know, I abused substances, but I never did it in any sort of committed way. So I always thought of myself not as an addict. I was more like a serial addict. I would like get in trouble up to a certain point, and then I would switch to a different drug. And some of them that were corporeal, and some of them were metaphysical, and some of them were
mm,
energetic, and some of them were relationship. But um, I was like my father, an addictive personality, and I think that's a major thing that working with Native American um, methodologies and healing practices um, that it didn't really heal me again. It really gave me a way to use those things in much more productive ways, not profitable but productive. And so those were my first major teachers. But at that same time, little after that, through friends here, through a witch store here in Grand Rapids that was called Earth and Sky. Some of you who are from this area might remember that. I started going to witch camp, which was out in the middle of nowhere in like I forget, Missouri or Kansas or someplace like that, and I became apprenticed to Starhawk. And so probably more than anybody, she is the one that created the template for what I consider myself to be right now. And so while some people think of me as a voodoo practitioner or an African traditional priest or a shaman or as a smartass, the 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 basis of how I look at myself right now is through reclaiming. And so her ideas around reclaiming witchcraft is the formation of who I think I am. So I consider myself to be a witch, but not with I'm not a religious witch. I'm a witch that has reclaimed all of the pieces of my own unique witch identity, which is all
mm,
of those things.
yeah, I lean towards
Ancestral,
reclaiming.
yeah, ancestral and cultural. And so all of the things people perceive me to be are because of that. And then I would say I have a string of just, I lived in the Black Hills of South Dakota, and so I was fortunate enough to be with many indigenous and native elders, and because of my connections to all of these um, other people, I forget her name now, Joan. She's a very famous, so famous I don't remember her. But I met many medicine men and women, and was a pipe carver. And so I made the pipes that are held and used by many um, Native American elders, mostly Lakota, Nakota, Dakota,
Mm,
Yankton, Sioux, and then but also Cherokee and Northwest. Uh, what they call Daughters of Copper Woman. And so I hold pipes from all of those traditions, and including the Anishinaabe tradition here, which is sort of the beginning of my spiritual career. Was very personal. Was just beginning to sweat with a man named Grandfather George here in Michigan, um, and and that was soon after I met Carl Sagan. I went to what I thought was a union meeting in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and it turned out it was an intervention. And a medicine man had a dream about me, and one of his apprentices, who was a union AFL-CIO delegate, said he knew who he was dreaming about, and it was me. And so they brought me down, and so they had a sweat lodge all set up, and a healing, a bear lodge set up, and they did an intervention. But my friendship with him was basically where I started understanding um, what became an interest in indigenous and Native American cultures, and then sort of blossomed into understanding I was interested in cultures that were what I call circadian cultures, people that believe they have a descendancy or an origin story based in the story of the Seven Sisters. Uh,
Okay.
and so Mayan and Lakota and Anishinaabe all believe that they come from the Seven Sisters, but so do the Japanese, the story of Subaru, the car. So the car symbol is the story of the Seven Sisters, and then the Greek story of the Seven Sisters, and
Mm-hmm.
but the Celts have one, and the Indonesians are also a Seven Sisters culture. So most of what I study and believe in eclectically all have that in common. And so it's not really until recently that I actually share that with anybody, because during the whole New Age craze, saying that you believed you came from the stars was likely to have people put you away. But but I think the more and more we learn and study about these cultures, the more we also learn that their knowledge of astronomy and astrology, physics, and things that are coming about uh, are much more point to their beliefs, whether it be literally or metaphorically, than it does to the Western view of the world today.
Right. Hmm. So you um let's talk a little bit about you've been doing some of these things online, my dinner with.
Oh yes.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, we actually have started to do this idea where I have dinner with somebody and we talk like we're talking right now. So imagine if you had a plate of food and I had a plate of food, we'd first talk about our food, but it's really based on the principle that when you're eating and having dinner with a person, you have a totally different conversation. Like it's less of an interview and more of a give and take, and it's also
Mm-hmm.
spontaneous and much more authentic, and so I really wanted to capture that. We've done a few of them, and while I really enjoyed them, we're really as you well know, really only now learning how to do it. And so we were on Crowdcast, and we are now probably going to move to Zoom and Facebook and YouTube, simply because that's where people are. But the whole thing was based on the idea that I wanted to do something really different and also really um, show who people really are, like how I know them. And so we've had my friend Rodney Vaccaro, who's an Emmy Award-winning author, but also one of the funniest, uh, dearest, and foodiest people that I know, and also just more of a smartass than I am. Um, and so I've known him pretty much for 40 some years. And then my friends um, Teresa and Fred, who Teresa owns a company named Fubble Entertainment, and so she writes television in the style of the 1970s, and like Brady Bunch. And she's got a company in LA that's trying to bring back that type of entertainment. And she and her partner have been very successful. But her husband is I knew him as a radio DJ and as a voice actor. And so I used to be a voice actor. And so I knew him from that, but he's also a Hindu Aparchik. And so so I would often meet him when I was at gatherings and stuff, and he would be teaching one thing and I would be teaching another thing, and we would share meals together. So he's part of the reason why I did this was because our
Okay.
meals were way more interesting, than any lecture that I ever gave. And so
Right. I think it's a really interesting idea. Um,
good because you're doing one.
ah, well, I have Altoids in front of me right now. If you want
Yeah.
to do that,
That's our foodie. I'll talk about my Altoids, which are cinnamon, and then
mine are wintergreen. So there we
yeah.
are.
See, there we are. So we've solved that
So
controversy, and showed the depth of our
I like
foodieism.
all of them.
Yeah, I do too.
Right.
They're not as curiously strong
Well,
as they used to be, and I don't think it's
that's
because I have
truth. That's
less
truth.
taste. I think it's because they've
Mm-mm.
whitewashed the flavor to match, you know, to sell to vanilla people.
Right.
Yeah.
All the other whitewashed things.
Yes.
Um, which I used to be a smoker, and they tasted stronger then. So now I
Yes.
know they've
I
cut,
that might
cut
be
back
true.
on
Maybe that's
whatever.
why. Yeah. I used to be a smoker as well. I smoked
Yep.
from 14 to 40. Uh, so
Mine was similar, about 15 to
yeah,
35 ish. I think I
yeah,
quit
yeah,
about 11 years ago.
yeah,
So
yeah. So
there we are.
and I liked to say I could quit, so I would quit periodically just to prove I could quit, and then I would start up again.
Hmm. Right. Right.
But
Which,
and,
it
and
doesn't
to
count
this
if you
day,
start
I
back up.
I really like smoking, and so I'm not one of those people that just like I hated the taste of my mouth and just didn't like, I loved smoking, and so I would say that I think of smoking every day. I haven't smoked in 30 years. I think that I
Hmm.
think I think yeah, I think that I quit when my son right before my oldest son was born. Um, no, hold on. That was the other time. I think I quit. The last time I quit was before for my second to the youngest son. So I think that, like you, it's been about 15 years. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah,
so
somewhere in that ballpark. Okay. So a transition from my dinner with, if you could have dinner with any one person on this side of the veil or the other, who would that be and why? Right?
I I tell you, um, right now, the one person on the other side of the veil that I really want to talk to is Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
Mm.
because more than anybody, I watch the courts like other people watch the basketball courts. Like the Supreme Court is
Hmm.
like the sport that I follow, and so she inter you know she has influenced the court more than any of the last three chief justices. But in the light of the last 4 years, and in the light of Trumpism, which is not like conservatism or republicanism, it's its own thing. That her influence
Truth.
within the court and within the group of 9 people in the court is just so amazing. And now that she's gone, we realize how much influence she had. And so um, when we see things today like Neil Gorsuch all of a sudden is a centrist, when he was known as an arch conservative, and what she taught him about textualism shows up in his decisions today. And he's been a real disappointment to Trumpianism. Um, and but even her influence on um, on Chief Justice Roberts, who now is to the left of where Kennedy and Breyer even was, and still is a conservative. I mean, he still believes in conservatism. So when I think about that, this is like wonky sports talk for the Supreme Court. She's the person on the other side of the veil because, man, she just unleashed the shit show that we have going in front of us right now, you know.
Indeed. Yeah.
And I just wish that I could go up there and convince her to come down and haunt the shit out of some people. Uh,
Yes.
and so I know you're reading Fifth Sacred Thing right now, and so if you're not that far down the line, she needs to come and haunt the shit out of certain people.
Right. Yep.
And so
When you kill a witch, they haunt
yes,
you.
right. And so that's the thing is that you know when I think about her and stuff and having dinner with her, you know, I think about this idea that is very Starhawkian. Is that I'm making up words all over the place today. Um,
I like it.
the Starhawkian idea of of walking on a film that is as thin as milk, as the skim on a milk, um, that we are between mundo mal and mundo bueno. You know that the good
Yeah.
world and the bad world
Yeah.
is just one thin skin away, and we are just one thin election away from coming back into the good world or going all the way deep into the bad world.
Right.
And she's the one that has influenced that positively, really held this off for 20 years. Um, and so her influence, we won't know her influence for many, many, many years now, but I'm pretty sure she started preventing this happening from her writings back when Reagan was president. And so um,
Right.
she just held out as long as she could, you know. So she's the live person. Um, I think that the dead person. I get those confused. Um,
I understand.
um, I I know this is really weird right now, but I would like a shot at having dinner with Donald Trump. Um, and I know that sounds really weird, but when I watched Savannah Guthrie um, the other night at the town hall, the non-debate, um, she had him on the ropes. She had so many facts and was exposing him. And so it's not just wanting to have dinner with him. I want like a my dinner broadcast, you know, where he doesn't get to run away from the questions. He doesn't get to bullshit us. Where I have fact checking already ready, you know, like I have texts. I know what he's going to answer to everything. So you
Hmm.
know, we've got the technology now to have a window pop up next to his head that says, "No,
With
this is not true," and these are all the proofs that you need. You
right.
know,
Right. Have a
but
team of fact
also
checkers.
I really believe that in his heart of hearts and in his tiny little heart and his whatever he's using for a soul right now, that he's a bully. You know,
Oh,
and
for sure. Hmm.
and and I believe that all bullies are the same. I believe that you can corner him to a point and reduce him to a point. Um, and the thing is that he exists on this idea that if a lie is big enough, it becomes reality. And so he, wherever he is, he relies on the big lie, as well as all of the people that will support him, but mostly the people who won't call him on his bullshit. I mean, if you've ever seen him at a press conference or at a debate or anything where the obvious follow-up questions are never asked, and when they are finally asked, he runs away. He always runs away. And when public pressure comes at him, he always changes his mind and he always acts like he never said something and he always denies. So, like, he's the bully I'd like to have dinner with and I'd like people to watch. You know, I really think that's must watch for his base.
Normally, I don't like to watch him, but I would watch that.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
well, I do think that if he was in a captive situation, he were not allowed to walk, and and
We're
also
not talking about taking him captive.
no, no. I mean, the thing is that I would have a mute button. He would not be able to interrupt me, and I would be able to fact check him in real time.
Hmm.
Because there's really nothing that he says that he hasn't said before, and so 99% of the things that he's going to say to you, if you have your facts already up, it's like I used to be a debater in high school and in college, and we had little 3x5 cards. That was our answers to everything. And I still think that way. I still think about the metaphor of when somebody says something. Um, I'm autistic enough to have scripts, and
Hmm.
things and facts that I keep, and things that I know, um, and even just ways of saying things, or um, like if you think I have a witty rejoinder, I probably dreamed that in 1987 and have been waiting to use that, for just that moment or whatever. Um, but the thing about it is that people who are prepared to fight bullies can reduce them, not to where they're going to admit anything, but to where the people who follow them no longer have the ability to rationalize or justify their support.
Right.
You have to admit your own greed, your own corruption, and your own white supremacy, or your own whatever your thing is. And at that point, like him, most people who are like that will eventually never cross over, and they won't join your side, they won't admit anything, but they will not vote. They will simply stay home, and that's really statistically true. And so part of it is not trying to convince the other side. Part of it is just trying to make them make them stay home. I think that's
Basically.
what happened. That's what happened to us in 2016. We stayed home, and so uh, even though we say we won by 3 million, um, Barack Obama had 4.4 million more votes than Hillary Clinton. Think about that. 4.4
Right.
million. That means he had 7.4 million more votes than Trump. you
Yep.
know we stayed home, and I think that those are the things that, if you can push those little margins, like the Russians are doing to us. If I could make 3% of the base on his side stay home, we would win every election across the country, just
Yeah.
a 3% push. And all he has to do is have dinner with me. I'll even let him eat whatever he wants. And I would purposely be a vegetarian in front of him because I knew that would irritate the crap out of him.
Oh, it would. That's
You know?
weakness.
Yeah, yeah. And eat with chopsticks because that's Chinese.
Ooh. Yeah.
So,
He might even put on his mask.
yeah, yeah, he would. If he had smell-o-vision, he would. Uh,
Right.
yeah. So, but
So, what have you read, watched, or listened to lately that's inspired you?
well, obviously, um, you and I have been talking about Fifth Sacred Thing on and off for a while now, and
Yes.
that is the one book that, other than the Bible, that I've read more than once, and I've read that now 15 times. And we're at this place where what was science fiction to me, however many years she wrote it, and was this sort of dystopian futurist. Um, and by dystopian, I mean impossible. This could never happen to us. Now it's like prophetic, and not only is it prophetic in terms of what it believes um, about oligarchy and the right, and the industrial military complex, and so many other things that are related, including big oil. Not only was it prophetic and prescient, it also went a step further where she actually wrestled with the ideas of what do spiritual people, what do nonviolent people, what do people who believe the opposite do to not become that way. And so when I think about books right now, that's the book um, that that I have picked up simply because it's time to read it again for me. I haven't read it in a couple of years. Um, and I think I should have read it last year. I could have warned everybody. Um, but I think that a lot of what I read now comes from popular culture. I think that um, a lot of the prescient and meaningful things come to us through popular culture. Partially because I think, like everybody else, I have a shorter attention span. I find that even though I've had ADHD all my life, that I was always able to read books, and so um, I find I don't have the attention span for long books right now, and so. Um, a 1 hour documentary or watching the A roll of Rachel Maddow for 20 minutes, that's the extent of my attention. And I have to admit that I'm kind of narcissistic. I really like my own writing, and so I tend to write something and then go back to it like ostensibly to edit it, but really just to admire myself. It's like, well, I'm just like my favorite writer today.
Uh,
On that note, though, I would say Heather Cox Richardson. If you are not reading Heather Cox Richardson, the historian,
I'm
um,
watching her videos
oh
that
yeah,
she's
watch her
making on a
videos.
regular. Yep.
She's not only brilliant, but she's tying this all together. She's really, really, really showing how all the pieces fit together, um, and also I just think that she's oddly informative and hopeful at the same time. Um, I find her, I find myself hopeful and refreshed when I walk away from reading her writing or watching her video casts.
Absolutely. I feel the same way because not only does she point out the pickle that we're in,
Yeah,
but then she also will point out these are the mechanisms that could be used to get out of this
right,
and
right.
that kind of thing. And I really like that because it gives a sense of hope where it seems
Yeah.
like things might be otherwise hopeless.
And I really I think that we need context and perspective right now. I really think that um, too many people forgot Nixon, and too many people have forgotten the fact that we come from a history of the founding fathers. As we talk about originalism, that they were all slave owners, and they were all
Mhm.
misogynists, and they were all rapists, and they were all killers, and so you know when we revere our history and our founding fathers, and then we revile Trump, and we don't see that he is a direct result of all of that, that he is the last gasp of that. He is like the dinosaur descendant of those,
Yes.
of those dinosaurs. And so, um, when when the vast majority of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and the signers of the Constitution were slave owners and were unwilling to give women the right to vote and considered Black people three-fifths of a human being, and even created amendments and rules to make it legal to go out and find them and hunt them and create militias to kill them and or take them back as their property. You know, what we're going through now needs the perspective and context of a historian. And I really uh, have depended on for hope people like her and Michael
Mm,
Beschloss, the presidential historian, to give us
okay.
perspective, and as spiritual people too, that
Right.
um, history tells us more than what we think of or believe about the future.
When we get correct history passed down.
Yes, Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really true.
We can't learn from the past if we're not being handed
Right,
accurate details and
right.
records. So I guess this is a good time to talk a little bit about the writing that you're working on now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
I
so,
guess.
so some of it we've touched on a little bit. I
Yeah.
think that if people don't know, Kate and I wrote a book, uh, and that's Lady Kate to some of you, and Kate Henriette Jauw, wrote a book called Absinthe, Alewives, and Alchemy, which is mostly about her life, a period of her life when we were together, where she discovered that she was a descendant of the two women who historically were the first ones recorded to make absinthe, and so um, uh, the Henriot women from Cuvée, Switzerland, Mel Henriot and Mère Henriot, um, were the ones that were first known and recorded um, to have what we call a recipe. Uh, were her ancestors, and so she's Kate Henriot, which is Henriot in Americanized Henriot,
Mm.
and that book was not just about absinthe, but it was about how absinthe were taken from these women by accusing them of witchcraft, because the making of absinthe was witchcraft, and so um, apothecary laws and medicine and liquor laws were all created to take these industries away from women, and whatever the industries of women were considered witchcraft. So making medicines was considered witchcraft, but it was medicine when men did it. And so so the recipe was stolen from Mère Henriot with the help of her own husband, and within years, Louis Pernod was producing it. He took the recipe to the other side, outside of Switzerland, to the border of France, and he was producing the first commercial versions of absinthe based upon the recipes. But the Swiss word for recipe is recept, which is the
Hmm.
same word as prescription. And so they were making medicines and they were making prescriptions. And so so what Kate makes now as an absinthe is based upon those ideas and that recipe or that prescription that they had. And that book was also about how ale was taken away from women, and that beer making became a man's thing, and that ale making was considered witchcraft. And so also the idea of chemistry and medicine and alchemy was first worked on by women, and so the first alchemists were women. So that's kind of what the book is about, but it's also about dreaming. It's about her coming out of her own witch closet and all kinds of different things. And so now the sequel to that is taking that the next step further, about um, her life and our life together and divination, as well as the amazing things that we found that are equally interesting as her history with absinthe. And so, so this next book is going to be much, much more about the reemergence of goddesses and goddess cultures and how it intertwines in Kate's own life and my own life, how her archetypal story and mine come together. And so the book I'm working on is the other side of that novel, which is the prequel. It's before I met Kate and how I came to be Baba Teddy, and that's the story that that we touched on a little bit today, but it really covers a period of time from when I first started not being an atheist and basically a skeptical asshole, and becoming much more really skeptical. I mean, I really think that as weird as the stuff that I believe in today, that my process was very much a skeptical scientific process, um, and that's my base, my background. And so Jungian psychoanalyst teaching and archetypal thinking is easy for me because I come from a paleontology and archaeology background, and so that's what my degree's in. Those are the two things I've never made a penny with, and so but they really help now, like when you're writing a book, and also when you're meeting cool people. Um, so it's really about my life. At the lowest moment of my life. And so it's not necessarily a triumphant story, but it is in the sense that it's what saved me from myself. And it also saved me from looking at all of the things I was interested in as an academic thing, because I was always interested in that kind of stuff academically. But you could be a witch and I would probably dissect you like you were a dinosaur. I mean, I would really want to know your lineage and look at you cladistically and what you evolved from and where your beliefs were
Hmm.
infected by other DNA and that kind of stuff. But um,
Well,
so I had to hit bottom actually, and
yeah.
so that's the story of losing my children and losing my first wife and losing my health and losing everything I owned. And so it's one of those go west young man stories.
Right. Right. And interestingly enough, when I was compiling some of the things that I wanted to talk about today, I had on my list originally, let's talk about probably one of the lowest points in your life and what you learned from that. But it sounds like we'll just like we touched on some of that, but we'll leave the rest for the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah. Well, I just think that from the point of where people think you're like you knew all of these famous people or all of this interesting information and wow, those people really shaped you and all kinds of things. I really think that the reality is you meet those people um, and hundreds of others. Because the real important people in my life were not all of the famous people that people can Google and know. Um,
Yeah.
but you meet all those people because they're healing you, and you're healing you because you need healing. And you're not really able to be a spiritual leader or a reader or an elder or an empath or anything without having empathy. And you can't have empathy without having gone through stuff. And so this is
Right.
about the stuff I went through, which was quite enough. And also what I chose to do with it, including starting with running away from it and really not wanting to be Baba Teddy. I don't think um, that was not my sacred dream growing up.
Okay. Interesting. So, uh, I guess that kind of brings up a question. In childhood, what did you think you wanted? What did you think you wanted to do?
I have this belief that our childhood vision of ourselves is the thing, um, and um, and so at various points of my childhood, I saw myself as an Egyptologist, as an archaeologist,
Hmm.
and because that was the only culture, non-Christian culture, uh, besides Native American culture, that was available to read about in the library. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have phones. I had a bakelite phone attached to the wall on a table, and a 6-foot asbestos cord. Um, and that was my idea of information was 411. It was like actually dialing that on the dial phone, and a woman would
Five
answer
five
on the other.
five 1 2 1 2.
Yeah, 555 1212. And then you actually talk to somebody, and that's how I called people. I would say GL 3647, and I need to talk to a number, or I could actually say I need to talk to Billy's mom, and typically the person on the other end, that's how old I am, the person on the other end would know who that was. And not only would she know who that was, but because it was a party line, she would listen into the conversation, and so would other people. Anybody who had a line in that party, could just dial each other up by clicking on the phone 3 times, and anybody else could listen. You just had to like be really quiet and learn how to breathe without making a sound. Um, I don't know where I was going with that digression, but the idea was that before there was Google and before there was, even the best libraries that we had access to had really, really, really like very, very little information. I remember like the Encyclopedia Britannica had less than a page about Egypt on it. And that was the entire reference pool that we had. So when I was really little, those little tiny tips of icebergs, whether they be dinosaurs or Egypt, were the things that captured my imagination. And then when I go and look back on it now, I see that my fascination with witchcraft and shamanism from a fiction point of view. And so when I look at the fiction that I used to read, it would be science fiction or it would be fantasy fiction that had uh, uh, a witchy or sorcery or occult undertones to them. And so those were the things I read when I was a little bit older, um, as well
Hmm.
as mysteries.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about Hexenwald.
Okay. Uh, So for those of you who don't know what Hexenwelt is out there, it's a module that Kate and we actually put it out already in order to develop it. But basically it is a game, and it is a game that is a self-standing game. You can play with it. I almost said you can play with yourself. Which you can,
You
but
can.
you don't have to buy the game to do that.
No, no.
But what Hexenwelt is a form of divination that is meant to be used with RPG games, and so you can use it as a standalone divination system, and you can also use it with RPG systems and board games and role playing, any dice divination related situation game where you use a dice to decide um, a situation or a conflict, or answer a question or create a numerical decider for something. And it comes out of the research that we did with Kate in my book, where we found that divination goes all the way back from Switzerland to Italy to Rome to Greece, from Greece to Egypt, from Egypt all the way to the East Ethiopian Nubian peninsulas, um, to the use of something you might be familiar with, to bones.
Hmm.
And so reading bones uh, was the thing that we found was a universal connector to people, but not that they just universally used it, but that they all knew about it from the similar sources. And so in 17th, 18th century Switzerland, if you were a Polish Jewish woman, you would probably have a bone to use. But if you were a Dominican nun, you would have a bone to use. If you were a Hungarian, uh, or if you were an Anatolian Greek Byzantine heathen, if you were a Celt from France, or um, if you were a Viking uh, uh, from local Switzerland. I mean, if you came from the bear cultures, you would use bones for divination. And so this common thing that people use, we find that the commonality is not just in divination, but men invariably would use those exact same tools for gambling, and that children would be using those exact same tools for learning. And so And so this pattern existed within all cultures, and we find that in Switzerland in the 17th and 18th century, that that was one of the ways that they accused you of witchcraft. If you had a bone on your possession, if you had a skull or a jawbone, or if you had a small goat ankle or a pig knuckle, that was enough to convict you. Um, of witchcraft. And so it's mentioned in the Maleficarian, the witch hammer,
Hmm.
the book that the Catholics used to identify and destroy witchcraft and witches, women mostly. Um, and so when we were looking at the pogroms, the 50,000 women killed in Switzerland alone, for witchcraft, we started to see that there were 7 different cultures at the time. And so Hexenwelt literally means 6 worlds. And there are about the 6 different worlds that existed in Switzerland that were considered to be witchcraft. And how all of these women, none of these cultures would have considered themselves witch. How they came to be that way. So an outgrowth of that story is Absinthe, of course, from the book
Hmm.
Kate and I wrote, but also this idea of divination. And so Hexenwelt takes this to a modern place where we started realizing that our children, who are all RPG players, um, all own 50 kinds of dice and stuff. Um, that the that the antecedent for playing roles and answering questions is divination itself. And so, as a one-on-one thing, but also as a group thing, that you would pose a question and you would answer that question as well as divine what that means to the whole group, or divine all of the group's questions, or you would also teach the group with divination. And so when we started to see that these cultures all came from the same place and they were all being accused of what's called Egyptian heresies by the church, where we get the word gypsy from, we
Right.
start to
Yeah.
see that, Roman paganism and Egyptian paganism and Jewish paganism, Hungarian paganism, Viking paganism were all um, heavily influenced by the Keltoi invasion coming out of Africa and Egypt. And so we started looking at all of these things. So Hexenwelt is, if you are an RPG player, is how do you use this bone as a dice, or well, some people say a die, but we
Hmm.
talk about what a dice is, and it's not a die. That singular for dice is dice. But we also talk about it spiritually. Dice is the name of the goddess of divination, or Dike if you are Greek, or DK, and how the game of dice came from bone reading, and Roman astragula, the reading of goat bones, came from the earlier reading of pig bones. And so, so with every game, you get a 6-sided dice, and we talk about why the cube is important and what it means historically. And you can do every single game and every single gambling game and every single RPG game using this one tool. And so we're really in the process of learning really how it was used and also how to use it in the future. I really think that the the future of paganism and witchcraft and the various crafts will not be brought forward by people reading books or going online. I really think that people who understand um, the paradigm of fortune and chance and improvisation and alternate reality and leveling up, as well as being objectively outside of the world as an empath and playing life like a character and seeing other people in terms of characters, that those are going to be the people that are the future of paganism and the future of learning, as well as this, the future of living in a world where fortune, where luck is going to become more important than meritocracy. I really think that Western capitalism and Western oligarchy and Greco-Roman thinking gave us the idea that you earn your luck, and that that there's a meritocracy, and that there is a stratigraphy about who's on top of who and who deserves what, and what's important. I think that dice and game playing teaches us that randomness is as important as planning, as important as information, as important as a deity, as important as thinking that God is involved in everything, and that on a quantum level they're really all the same thing when you start talking about synchronicity and all of those kinds of things. So,
Right.
so the people who play games to us are the future, and the children are the future. I don't want to break into song here,
That's I was hearing it.
uh, but if you're feeling that, it moves to a whole other level of things that Kate and I believe in, that we keep to ourselves. And so as we start to look at prophecy and star cultures and what's coming forward, we're also talking about what we call metamagica, and the idea that these practices, that divination, for instance, is something anybody can do if you understand where and how you divine from. And so a lot of people will say, well, I can't do mediumship because I don't see anything. Well, okay, so you give lie to that whole thing, right? Um, and the idea is that if you can't see, you have powers that are somewhere else then, right? And so while that's true with us, we understand that on a physical level, we don't understand that on a metaphysical level. And so if you operate out of your sixth chakra and you see stuff, um, visually see stuff, that's your metaphor that you work with in life. But I don't work with that metaphor. While people think of me as a seer, I don't see anything. I am a fifth chakra practitioner, and things just plop out of my mouth. I have
Hmm.
no idea where they come from. I don't think about them. Um, if I had to think about them, I'm autistic enough to totally freeze if I have to think about things in advance and not just do what I'm doing right now. Like
Right.
move to a place of channeling.
Right. Well, I guess there's one more piece. You just touched on Metamagica. Why don't you unpack
Yeah,
that
yeah,
just a little bit more? Yeah,
yeah. Well,
because I see that's one of your latest things that you're
I
working
think that
on.
is one of our latest things, and we're really, like a lot of things that we're doing right now, they're really works in progress. But rather than researching them, like in libraries or with sources or with books or whatever, we realize that our most valuable information comes from people. And so, like you, Kate and I have been really blessed to know hundreds of readers and have readings from literally hundreds of people, and they don't do it the same way. Every tarot reader I know approaches tarot totally differently. And while there is a level of rote learning that you do, well, and I'll use tarot as an example, but really we could be talking about crystal balls or bones or anything.
Hmm.
Um, you really, when you become a good reader, you really come from a place that's authentic where you come from. And so I started thinking about this idea when I started seeing that more and more young people born after 1962, were moving from a sixth chakra place. Okay, so Kate moves from a sixth chakra place. She was born in 1960, 8, I believe. So she was born after 62. And so I started looking at this indigo phenomena, or this crystal phenomena, from a real skeptical place, like from a real place where and I don't mean this derogatorily, but I do. I really don't like the New Age. Part of it is because my skeptical self really doesn't appreciate the conflation of things, the misinformation, the blind belief, and also the what I think of as the privileged view of it. But what I started to see was what there's real scientific evidence that there is a physiological difference between people born after a certain point, and that all kinds of studies started looking at this idea of people who are much more third eye related, and then looking into the history of why they were called indigo children. And so I started to find so many synchronicities between this idea of prophecies from indigenous cultures that believed that the people of a certain generation um, uh, would be the ones after a matriarchal swing and a patriarchal swing, that the next generation would be children. And so looking at why the word indigo was so often used to describe them, no matter what the culture was, I started to understand that our culture perceives things from a rainbow perspective. You know about rainbows, right?
Mm-hmm.
So every culture that has chakras, and many cultures do, perceive those chakras to be red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, same as the rainbow colors. And that this spectrum also related to how um, a person related, and they related from that place. Um, and so some people operate from a green space, from their heart, and some people um, operate from a blue space, from their throat and their mouth, and some people are really red, and
Right.
and operate from their first chakra, and some people have womb knowledge, and womb intuition, and operate from their second chakra, and so the Mayans look at this from that color perspective. And so many years ago, I actually started to learn medicine wheels that relate to the chokla, that relate to the Mayan way of looking at this. And when I started to see their prophecies really were talking about indigo children, the whole thing started to come together. At the same time, Kate and I started, really studying and understanding our own children, who are all born after that. And,
Mm-hmm.
I'll use this as an oversimplification, but the final proof came for me when I learned that children who are born without a lens have the ability to see ultraviolet light. And that one of the things that we were finding was that the ability to sense ultraviolet light, whether it be in a CRT screen or a sunset or whatever, was related to what's called the pineal foramen. So now, as a paleontologist, I knew exactly what that was. It's an organ on the third eye that has
Mm-hmm.
its own optical nerve that goes to the pineal gland. And so all of a sudden I had this scientific proof, and I had this nervous system that was not part of the autonomic nervous system. And as I started looking at all of the chakras, I found that each one of them had its own optic nerve, it had its own discrete nervous system that went, except for the heart. The heart, it turns out, has a non-physical nervous system, and it operates like a Wi-Fi, and so
Mm-hmm.
I started to see the Mayan system, the rainbow system, is true, and it fits over the Hindu system. It fits over the shamanistic system of what the Mircea Eliades used to talk about when he talked about the shaman of Tunguska. And he talked about how they perceive and how they would take people who were damaged and say, because you no longer had this chakra, you now had that chakra, or how these two chakras work together. And so I started like looking at that and realizing that not only were all of these indigenous cultures right in what they were saying, but they were also right historically. And so when they were started talking about how there was a time when they could see at night, when they could, all of a sudden you start to say, well, if you can see infrared, um, you can see at night. And so if you can see ultraviolet at one end of the perspective, the perception and the light spectrum, then it makes sense that at one time we must have been able to, as we know animals do, see from the other end of the spectrum. And so now, not only can we see the visible spectrum of rainbow, but we're beginning to see the invisible spectrums at both ends. And so people are regaining the ability to have night vision. People born after a certain time, and there are people actually who are born before that, but as a generalization, younger people look at the night sky and they don't see black like most of us do. They see indigo. They see a deep, deep blue and violet colors. But because we don't sit there and talk about what we see all the time, and we talk about
Mm-hmm.
things metaphorically, we have no idea what other people see and don't see. And so now, as we start to learn what younger people are seeing, we start to see that at every age of our existence, um, that we saw through a specific perspective, so that, like when you read Homer and Ulysses and the Iliads and the Odysseys, you see that he never describes the ocean as blue. He never describes the the sky as blue, and he describes the night sky, the day sky, and the ocean as red, as shades of red. And so as we start looking at all of the writing that went on when writing first started, and we look at, the Greeks and the Egyptians and the Chinese, the ones that we have the most of, we start to see that there's a predominance of describing the ocean as red and the sky as red. And it's not till the Egyptians start talking about blue as a
Mm-hmm.
color and using blue as a color that everything changes. So the advent of monotheism and linear thought and literacy all of a sudden morph from the red sky to the blue sky, and from the red wine ocean to the blue ocean. And we move as a culture and as a species from the red chakra to the blue chakra, or to the green chakra, because that was
Right.
the intermediate, point, is that those cultures that emanated, what we call heart cultures, or matriarchal cultures, they saw the world as green.
That's green.
and
Right.
and they didn't mean that euphemistically about plants. They meant that about everything. That they perceived the world visually as a green tinged world, and we know now that primitive primates operate from that same place. So there's a whole bunch of science and stuff um, that we started going to, but now we're looking at it from a more practical, useful place. Is if you want to be a person that divines, or a person that has mediumship, how do you do that, and what are the tools that you can use, and how are you the tool? How does it not come from the divine? How does it not come from the Godhead? Or how you are a piece of the Godhead and your unique piece? How do you read? What chakra do you use? And really allowing people to explore that way. So we don't know if it's going to be a book or if it's going to be a whole series of ideas and conversations
Mm-hmm.
that are much more of a wiki paradigm,
Right.
because we don't know everything about this, and we can't really apply a scientific method to it in any timely fashion. What we really need to do is gather information anecdotally and scientifically over all sciences and over all modalities and over all paradigms of reading, and also really look to our history. And so this is really the beginning of a conversation um, that we hope to have bits and pieces of to present, to get people interested and to get more information from other people, but also to present at Hexfest in August, where the theme is magic itself,
Okay.
and really trying to define magic in a universal, non-religious not witchcraft, not paganism, heathenism, or not
More
any
of
of
a
the isms.
technology.
But
Yeah,
really,
more of
yeah,
a
what's the
techno.
paradigm of magic itself? How does it emanate out of all of us universally, and not within culture or race or religion or any of
Hmm.
those things? Like, what's the science of our gifts? And we're just at the start of that. I really think it's exciting for us because that's what we talk about anyway, but also finding real practical ways to share it with people who say, well, I'll never be able to do this like you do
Mm-hmm.
because I don't, whatever, I don't see, I don't feel, I don't, whatever the thing is. I really believe that everybody can. And I don't want to work us readers out of a business, but I think that leaves us who read, to do really deeper things, to really call to us people who have deeper problems, and to have fewer tourists and fewer people who want to know why Johnny doesn't love them, than and looking at people who are in life and death situations and who it allows us to triage, I think, and it also gives us a different level of sustainability that we don't understand yet, but I think it really elevates readers to a level of what we think of as medicine and more parts of our culture that are valued, so if you could actually be considered a lifesaver rather than an entertainment, I think that our sustainability within the culture changes. And not that we can charge more, but I think that, well, like we were talking about before, people will take care of you if you can take care of them. If you can save the lives of their family, they'll make sure you have food on the table. And that's ultimately what we want, certainly as a socialist, that's what I want,
Right, right.
so
Same, same. And I know just watching the first video and attending that on Meta Magica,
yeah.
I'm extremely excited and I plan to follow along. So,
Yeah. Well, I hope you contribute too.
oh, very,
I think that much of what we do and whatever, and I use your site as a metaphor, but I mean that very realistically. I really
hmm
don't think it's just a metaphor. I think that it really defines the paradigm, and I think that a lot of what you take for granted about who you are and what you do, um, you I bet if you thought about it, well, you'd either become really self-conscious and frozen, or you would have a whole different new thing that you could be sharing with people and teaching with people, uh, to the point of, I mean, like, so much of what you do is really not physical. I really do think there are times when you are ahead of the pieces, and I
yes,
also think that there are times um, when you read against the piece, and that something
definitely.
else triggers in you, and that's a fascinating thing. I don't see that in a lot of readers, who move within a template, but it's like, um, I do believe that for some of us, our props, our cards, our bones, our whatever, are triggers, and sometimes we don't need them, sometimes we do need them. But I also think that you've been able to develop something entirely uniquely on your own, and therefore you have insights to that. And because you have insights to that, you also then have insights to metamagica itself, and so
Yeah.
it's not like I would like you to teach the bones. I would like you to teach Jack, you know? Um,
You're not the first person to say that, and I don't
yeah,
know what that looks
because we don't
like.
know Jack.
This is I find this out too, and I don't intentionally try to be greedy with my who I am and with
Yeah.
my details and my stories, but apparently I am.
Uh-huh.
So I need to
Yeah,
work
but
on that.
unless you asked me, I would never be saying half of the things that I'm saying now. Like,
Right.
I
Yep.
don't typically, I'm really not that honest about myself. I'm really, I love to talk about you or things or stuff or history or things that, interest and amuse me, but I don't really talk about myself that much.
Indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of it, I think, inside of my head is I have to always remind myself, first of all, that people don't know these things that are
Yeah,
in your head,
yeah,
and also, um, they actually don't know the experiences and
right,
everything.
right.
And I walked through my early childhood, hearing voices and talking to things that people
Yeah,
called imaginary friends, and I was like, I don't think so. I don't think that's what that is. But so it was probably until about 10 before I actually
yeah,
completely, fully comprehended that my experience with the other side
yeah,
and with my vision and all of these things were not the same experience as other
yeah,
people. Because I wondered, how do people drive and see stop signs and all of
yeah.
this? So yeah, yeah,
So
something to think
I
about.
think about like these conversations that we're having. If we had like, if we had time at convocation to not do convocation, just sit in a big circle and have these conversations, um, because I'm only allowed minutes with people at convocation, and I always walk away with nuggets of things and stuff that are amazing to me, and not just from teachers and readers and stuff. I think that
Hmm.
some of the most insightful and amazing things that I've learned at things like that and places like that, were from people who really came from a needier space or a victim space, or at least a feeling of inferiority when they had so much to offer. And
Yeah.
and so I think that the blessing of all the stuff we're going through right now is this: we're having these conversations, they're being recorded, and we're being forced to talk. We're being forced to have these virtual talking sticks.
Yes. Yeah.
Like the technology of Zoom doesn't allow you to interrupt. And it's making us much better listeners as well, I think. And so,
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think it's helping us all work on our listening skills, and our attention span. While TikTok does the opposite.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's honing our impatience,
Right,
and
right,
so.
right.
But again, it's like it's like I tend towards epic poetry and rap. I come from a Detroit rap background and a hip hop background, um, as a poet, um, and I've had to force myself as an adult to learn haiku and to practice haiku, to
Mm,
actually learn how to like boil down the essence of things, because I watch my children on TikTok and they're screaming hysterically, and I look at it and I don't understand what's going on, um,
yeah,
but the 15 seconds of what they're referencing has a gestalt of hundreds of TikToks and billboards and a distillation, and an evolution by choices, uh,
right.
that puts them right in their own people, with their own language, with their own paradigms and their own reference level and their own inside jokes that I am not a part of. I have not, I don't know, whatever, swiped or anything in the right ways to get anything that's going on, And I talk to them about Facebook and they laugh like it's a telephone with a cord.
Right. It's an archaic
Yeah,
platform.
it's a totally archaic thing to them. It's like, how are you gonna?
TikTok's good for a laugh for me.
Yeah,
I go there to look at the inappropriate children, I guess.
yeah, yeah. And inappropriate parents, who like to
Yes.
swear
Who
about
like
their
to
children.
record, who encourage the
Yeah,
children to do the
right,
things for the
right, right.
camera. Yeah.
So, I'm sure my spirit animal is there somewhere. I just don't have the wave, uh, the wavelength right now to add one more app to my life. So.
It's just short attention span
Yeah,
theater is
yeah.
what it
I left Twitter, soon after I realized that it was just a place for Trump to run the government from. I didn't want to like feed it or be a part of
is.
it. But now I'm tweeting on Facebook, and people keep saying, "Well, why don't you just do that over on Twitter where you belong?"
Go back to Twitter where you
Yeah,
belong.
yeah.
Well,
Or stop
I know,
writing things with 50,000 words because
right,
I didn't get on Facebook, to read a novel,
right.
so.
So I know that you write rather prolifically on Facebook. So here's this question for you.
Mhm.
If you could have a billboard out in the world, what would it say and why?
Well, right now, most obviously, it would just say vote. Uh, but um, but I think it would be more focused than that. I think that if I were to be an analytic ad creator, I'm very concerned right now of the 100 million people in 2016 and in 2018 that did not vote at all. They were registered and did not vote. And so, if you imagine that 62 million people voted for Donald Trump, and that 65 million people voted for Hillary Clinton, and we're really pissed about that. 100 million people didn't vote at all.
Yeah,
That's like 40%. We are actually in the midst of a government being run by the will of less than 26% of the registered voters. And
absolutely.
so I think that my billboard would say, all of you who didn't vote are responsible. And I really believe that. And you need to make up for that. You owe us your vote, um, and 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 I don't, because I don't blame a narcissist. Um, I don't blame a narcissist for running for president, but
For doing what he's able to do. Yep,
right. But I
yep,
do blame people for voting for him. But if the
same.
vast majority of people didn't vote at all, where do we lay the blame? I
Right,
really think, and I know there are reasons for it. I know they couldn't get behind Hillary, and I know they didn't have their, their person didn't make it, and also, there is still no Satanist party for some people,
right. And
but
there's a
I
lot of
think,
people that feel that there's nothing really going on with voting,
right,
that
and
the
I really
decisions
think
have already been made.
that level of cynicism. Um, I mean, I think it's provably untrue, but I also
Mhm.
think that underneath it, we all know now, after 4 years, that whatever cynicism you had, that candidate A is not like candidate B. They are
Right,
not all the same. That not only is that a false comparison, it's a wildly false comparison, And I also think that if you think that if you think that the idea that hundreds of thousands of people are dying and the collateral damage of just death alone, um, that you put yourself philosophically in this place where we used to say in our philosophy classes, if you knew Hitler as a child, would you kill him? And um,
mm,
and and I think philosophically, I come from this: if I meet the Buddha on the road, I'm going to kill him. And I think that this philosophical place that says that we should have known Hitler was coming. That he didn't just spring out of nowhere. He didn't just like ride a Panzer tank into Germany and take over. It took him from 1920 to 1938 to take over a country. 18
yep,
years
yep,
democracy before we got to this place. And we got to that place also because people didn't vote, also because people blamed other people, also because people thought it was the Jews, people thought it was the Spanish flu, people thought it was the Depression, people thought it was all kinds of things. And while one person took advantage of a small minority of people, a large majority of people sat by knowing full well what was going on and did nothing. And they
right,
were the majority. And I think we're at that place again. And
right,
it's not hyperbole. It's not an overblown piece, and it's not a political piece. It's a morality piece. And I find it hard I find it hard to be with pagans who are apolitical knowing the history of paganism and of their own
Hmm.
lineages. I find it hard to be with pagans or heathens who are racist,
Right.
knowing the history of their people and of their religions and of the things that they are very often just cosplaying at to
It's
confirm
yeah.
their own racism and their own biases and things. And so I really think that that's my billboard, and I'm sticking
That's your
to it.
billboard, and he's sticking with.
Those
I.
of you who did not vote, you owe us your vote. you know.
Let's put him up
Uh,
all over.
oh yeah, and I'm happy to explain why. But
Right.
if you only have 3 seconds to read a billboard, you know, um, it needs to be aimed at those people.
Right.
And I'm also hopeful and heartened that many of them are voting. I
Hmm.
really
Right.
am very, very heartened by the amount of voting that's going on right now. And also, it's not like we can't do it. I mentioned before that Obama had 7 million more votes um,
Right.
than the GOP, and that's astounding. You know,
It is.
in
Yeah.
in 21st century America, that the number one and the number two highest numbers of voting Americans was for a black man, um, and that says so much about our country. And then we take 2 steps back.
No, we do. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
Um, but it makes me not cynical. It makes me have lots and lots of hope for the possibilities of doing this.
Right.
It's not as bleak as you would read on your Facebook feed. I don't know if there is a more hopeful social media platform, uh, but uh, but the one
Yeah.
I'm on, the one I write for, is pretty bleak right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So now I think as we're moving towards the end of our time together, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about the children's books that you have out. Um, yeah, let's talk
Yeah.
about that.
So I've always written children's books, and so I do a long form of poetry. If you Google me, you'll see that some of them are still. I still sell a book that I wrote 30 years ago called The Christmas Story, and it's
Mm,
a poem, um, and it's about a little boy. I don't want to give a spoiler
yeah,
alert,
don't, no
but
spoilers.
it's about a boy named Nick who was at the nativity, um, and so you could probably guess the rest. Uh, but the whole idea of these poems were to give a different perspective of things that we think we know about, and I think that Kate has always done. She illustrates for children's books. She's won several awards and things. Um, but we really wanted to do stuff together. And she has there's a lot of people that paint really detailed and do really beautiful technical things. Um, but she has a cartoon style. I don't know if um, people out there saw her Inktober series for the last couple of years. Um, but she has a cartooning style that I really, really enjoy. And I find it's very, very expressive in a very immediate way. Um, and so she has a way of drawing expressions in a cartoon style. And so I started writing these poems about different animals. And so and I've actually written about 11 of these books already, and they're just in various stages of being illustrated and coming out. And some of them won't come out because I went a little too far politically with them. But but
Turn them
the
into adult books.
yeah, yeah, they will. And so it's like um, when they um, when they come out, that people will see that the ones that are out right now, it's Arlo the whale and Peter the pangolin, uh, and uh, typically it's about an animal, and it's about an animal who is a child animal that is learning something, you know. And so there is a sort of a fable feeling to them, um, but they're also written in verse and rhyme. And I'm a slave to meter and a slave to rhyme. Uh, and uh, and I'm too old to freestyle, so I actually just write stuff now and make books. But the thing about those is that as much as they are about little quatrains and rhymed writings, they're really about the characters and their expressions, and there's a certain empathy that I want children to have with these feelings. Partially because I don't think we have that anymore. I really think
Mm,
that we have gone into an age where everything is about information, and everything has accelerated our it's accelerated our innocence. And so I really wanted to be involved in doing something that was innocent, you know, that was something that you could read as a child, or as a parent you could read to your children, and to even very, very young children, but also something that was written at a level and in a way that that harkens back to Dr. Seuss, you know,
right.
where rhythm and meter and rhyme is what actually taught you not just how to read words, um, but also gave you the context for grammar, and also taught you all kinds of lessons. And obviously, now that Dr. Seuss has fallen out of favor um, with with the politically correct, then somebody else had to step in, and so I thought, why not me?
Why not you?
Right, and all my heroes, storytellers, have been marginalized, or are no longer permissible to be read by children or liberals. You know, um, so I am the new Dr. Seuss. I'm the new Shel Silverstein. I'm the new Garrison Keeler. I'm the new Al Franken. So,
Sounds
and I have
good.
not, yeah, I have not kissed, groped, or anybody other than my wife. So,
Oh,
um,
okay.
so you
So
can
you've already been
safely.
vetted?
I've been vetted. Well, I've been vetted by my wife, so she's not very, she's not very objective.
Uh,
But I really, really do think that while part of me is really detailed and esoteric, and I can go on and on and on, another aspect of me really wants to be essential and go to essence, and really um, speak to children in an adult way, but also these are books for adults. You know, anybody who reads this is going to realize that I'm really talking about Arlo Guthrie and Woody Guthrie. They're really talking that I'm really talking about, um, you know, no, I can't remember his name. I'm having senior moments today. Pete Seeger.
I was going to ask
Uh,
if you were talking about Pete Seeger.
yeah.
Yeah.
So all of these things, are teaching stories to adults too. And so if you understand the history of protest and the history of folk singing, you'll see that I've taken folk heroes and people who have different perspectives and pasts, and uh, and have written about them in fables as
Mm,
animals. Um,
right.
but they can be read by adults to understand heroes from musical history too. Um,
Yeah.
and so and so I am still talking about race, and I still am talking about oppression, and I still am talking about the man, um, but in a totally different way. And so
Right.
um, you don't have to garner that from what I'm writing. You can garner something else, but kids get it. Sometimes,
Yeah.
but kids get it.
I need to read them. I'm going to have to be honest. So far, I think the only book that I've read has been Recension,
Yeah, yeah,
and I very much enjoyed Recension.
yeah. And
But
that
also,
you must have a really good attention span, because that was a pretty esoteric and heady book, and it's really a notebook. All of this other stuff that I'm writing now, and
mhm.
Metamagica comes out of that thinking.
That's kind of the impression that I was getting. The
Yeah,
more you
yeah,
talked about Metamagica,
yeah,
it reminded me of that writing.
yeah. Um, and we will eventually get back to recension. In fact, it'll probably be included um, in if we do a course book or something. It'll probably be included as a reference because
Okay.
much of the the realizations that I had and much of the information that I got and was handed synchronistically at the time is contained. Probably about half of the stuff that led to Metamagica, I first tried to put down in some sort of a writing. And again, to try to elicit ideas from other people.
Yeah.
And so people have written me copiously about their experiences and what that triggered in them, all of the different things. For those of you who don't know that book, it's a mathematical and a scientific and an anthropological and a spiritual and and
It's
a
all
chakra way of looking at all of the chakras um, in modern culture, history, and all kinds of different things. That led to what we will be calling metamagic. So I'm feeling excited about all of that stuff, but really, really excited about the idea that the next age that we're going to have is the age of the children. And so I
yeah.
really want to embrace that from the very youngest children all the way to us really old children.
Yeah. I'm hearing Whitney Houston again.
Yeah, yeah. She is the soundtrack of my life. I've had my Bobby Browns and addictions as well. So,
um, let's see. Well, let's see. Is there any questions, anything that you've been wanting to ask me that you have not?
you know, there are some, and I will. I really do think that we will have my dinner with Jack together, and it probably will be one of those because these are going to turn into, instead of a broadcast, they'll be like you have to buy a mini series. I
Okay.
really think that there's so much to say. But the one thing that I'm really interested in about right now is um, I think that when I read you right now, I I get the same sense from you that I do from a lot of readers that they are on the precipice in the worst possible time of a paradigm change in how they live their own lives and stuff. And so obviously this podcast is an outgrowth of that. But I also wanted to ask you, um, how's that working for you? You know what I mean? Like on a day-to-day level, I um, understand like our Kate and I have our frustrations, and certainly money is going to be one of them. But also at the same time, we are so impatient for the future and so full of hope and so full of ideas and everything. And I get that sense from you too. And so I just wanted you to give voice to that. Especially if you can give me some words of hope, as we move towards uh, the election.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot there. So yeah, the podcast is something that has sprung out from this sheltering in place and this whole change in life. Because yeah, I'm used to going out and working fairs nearly every weekend and doing the things, and now I'm pretty much restricted to my disability income.
Mhm,
And my budget is not set up for that. So there's been a lot of modifications,
mhm,
and I've not truly had to do without yet. But I do see that on the horizon. That if we continue on the same trajectory, that I'm going to have to rely on some pantries and
mhm,
the kindness of my community, which I do have a very loving, kind community. So, but I do have a lot of hope. This is just, I've been through a lot in my life, and so has everybody else. And I think this is one more thing that we're moving through. There's no guarantee that we're going to come out the other side and everything be a utopia and sparkling and shining. There's no, we have to put in the work. But I think that's part of what this is. And I do teeter between that hopeful place and, quite honestly, a place of despair. It kind of depends on the day and sometimes the hour.
Yeah.
Um, but we keep going because we're still here.
Yeah.
We keep going, and I have a feeling that even when I'm not still here, I
Yeah.
will be expected to keep going.
Well, I have a list, if you do go, of who you can haunt the shit out of.
Right.
And
I'm
so
accepting that list.
That list is continually updated. So
I okay. I think I'm going to create a Google Doc so people can
now,
just submit
yeah,
that.
mutual pact. If I pass before you, I will come and look on your altar for a list. And so
That works. That
just
works.
leave me a list, and
I
I'll
will.
take care of the rest. No karma involved for you. Just
Perfect. I will. I'll leave the list. Actually, I'll leave it right next to Scully,
yeah, yeah.
which, by the way, Scully is doing well and keeps watch over my ancestor altar and my divination altar all the time. Um, really actually embodies many of my ancestors at this point in time. So,
So for those of you who don't know who Scully is, or think that we're talking about the X-Files,
yes. Yes.
there's a hot blonde woman on your altar
There's on my ancestor
who
altar.
doesn't really believe anything you say. And Scully is a skull, and I make ritual objects, and among those ritual objects is and are skulls. In fact, I will be debuting one of those skulls at Holly and Shell's divination weekend on November 1st. They're actually the Halloween, the All Hallows weekend. They'll be doing stuff over in Saugatuck or out at Holly's place on the
Mm.
on the on the distaff side of the mitten over here by Saugatuck, where Holly's store is. But we're going to be on her land, and so it'll be an opportunity for readers to do reading, which a lot of us have not had. But also, Kate and I are going to be bringing 2 altars there, and my altar will be a skull dedicated to Dr. John, and all of the Johns, St. John's, and who are healers, including Dr. John, the musician who just passed.
Hmm.
And so that is an altar that's devoted to the plague gods, the saints and the animals and the things
Yes.
that we venerate when we're in a time of plagues, not just the COVID virus, but the plague of depression and the plague of unemployment and the plague of, all of those things.
Right.
And including plague dogs, because we will also be honoring Santa Roche and the bubonic plague, and the dogs that have throughout history have rescued the saints. And so there are dogs right now that we need to be calling on to help us in this particular time of plague. So it's an altar for those kind of people. And then we're going to be doing an ancestor altar of some sort for either Dia de los Muertos or Dia de Muertos or Santissima or Fet G'day or All Hallows. In some way, shape, or form, we will be putting up an altar for those who just want to come and hang out and venerate and offer at an altar at this particular time. On election eve, by the way. So if you need to say your last prayers or whatever,
Right.
or to cast your voodoo doll into the fire, whatever it is you do, and I'm not making suggestions here, but
Just telling you what you can do, not telling you what to do.
Here's an opportunity if you have that if you have that kind of distance, travel, wavelength, or whatever, or want to be out amidst socially distancing and respectful people who
Right.
promise not to spray any droplets on you. And those who know me and Witch Doctor Utu know we spray droplets on people, so we have learned the error of our ways, at least for the meantime, you know. And so we won't be baptizing anybody. We will be wearing masks. So, oh,
So for anybody who's actually watching the video, this is Scully. This is one of the John Skulls.
yeah. So Scully is disappearing in and out of reality as we watch it. It's really weird. It's really cool. Yeah. Um, so yeah, I think that before I put the Dr. John skull out, I will probably ask you to reprise that to get people an idea of what it is that
Sure.
we do.
Sure.
But I'm writing a book about Dr. John and the veneration of skulls in the Vodou tradition, the tradition that I preach from, and how to work with them and use them and why they're not scary at all. But also the fascinating history of slavery and American diaspora religions like hoodoo, voodoo, vodou, conjure, root work, all of that stuff uh, through the eyes of Dr. John, or the skull sockets of Dr. John. And Kate will be illustrating that book, so I'm very excited about
Wow.
that. You know,
That's very cool. We have
yeah,
some
and
really cool
so
things on the horizon.
that for sure will be out by Hexfest in August, but probably will be done by WitchCon,
Hmm.
which is an online festival. But we will be doing a class probably about that. But we'll also be doing a series of classes on Vodou, Voodoo, Hoodoo, you do, I do what, um, between WitchCon and HexCon. March and not only just to raise interest, but also because we really think that um, all of us who are in varying branches of African traditional religions need to get our shit together and join each other. Um, and also, that's a truism for every kind of witchcraft, every kind of paganism, heathenism, that we're really all the same. And
Agreed.
that's the underlying message of Metamagica, of our books, of our children's books, and the skulls. You know, that underneath all of our differences, we all have we all have our skeletons. You know. So.
Right. Ultimately, that's what we are. At least in this incarnation.
Right. Right.
In convenient shipping materials. um, well, so is there anything that if you were conducting this interview or this chat, is there anything that you would have asked yourself that I've neglected?
You know, I really think we've gone all the way around
We have.
the all the way around the horn. But I think that the one thing that I would have asked is it's a prediction actually, and I know that it's like we get put on the spots or whatever, you know. But I'm asking readers and politician, you know, pundits right now. Do you think we're in a thing that's only months from being over, or do
Mm.
you think that it's going to be a year or more? And I'm just asking everybody right now, and trying to get a reader's read, you know. And so that would be the question that I would ask you, because inquiring minds want to know.
Well, personally, my bones don't tell me anything letting up in the next few months.
Mhm.
Um, and another thing, I was doing a reading one day when I heard Fauci in the background talking about moving into an era of pandemics,
Mhm.
and the bones seem to back that up.
Yeah, yeah,
So it's a matter of what do we do with that information, and How do we proceed? What's the future look like?
Yeah, yeah.
Because I keep hearing some people go, there is not going to be a new normal. The new normal is going to be the old normal.
Right, right.
No, no, no. There will be a new normal. We're not even through the transition phase yet, so we don't know even what that can even look like yet. So,
Well,
but
that's totally
really,
in agreement. Yeah.
yeah, but really, all the hope, all the hope.
Mhm.
I mean, I mean, if we can get somebody in power who is actually working towards addressing it,
Yeah,
instead of pretending it's not going on,
yeah,
that would be one step in the right direction for
yeah.
sure. Um, so I want to make sure that we put this out there. How can our listeners stay connected with you online?
Well, I think that the easiest way, the way I'll respond is Circadia, Surcadia, and I'll explain that someday. Um, S as in Sam, Urcadia at gmail.com.
And I'll
Um,
put that in the show notes too.
yep. And Circadia.com is our website. Um, uh, Kate and Ted, all smalls, all smashed together, Kate and Ted. And that's our Instagram. And that's just, us as a cute couple. Um, and much more pictorial version of us that we're developing right now,
Mm-hmm.
because we're told that we need to like get out there more. And then we'll be, as soon as all of this is over, the election and everything, we'll be getting out to doing our programs in a much, much more public and accessible way on Facebook and YouTube. But the easiest thing to do is to follow me um, on Facebook, and if you're into politics, uh, which hopefully you'll only have to be into for another couple of weeks. Uh, I am at a thing called SME Politics Club, where I write long form dissertations that are um, really wonky and boring for some people. But if you're really, really into some of the stuff that we talk about or that I put on my site, that's where all the real information is. Mm. And that's my other we won't call it a passion, uh, but it's what I do instead of screaming at the top of my lungs at every street corner. So I want to take a more literate and logical approach to that.
Right,
And,
right.
and then I'll see you all at the voting booth.
Definitely.
It's definitely where I want to see all of you. So.
Well, my hope is that you will join me again on further subsequent shows to do some storytelling for us.
Oh, I would love to do that. Part two. Um,
Part two.
yeah, but also I would love to do. I just love this whole format, and it's so new, and we're the pioneers, So if we don't get killed, we'll get rich.
It's the new radio.
Yes, it's the new radio, and I have a face for radio, so
Ah, I've been told that too.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me today.
Oh,
You've
thank
brought a
you.
lot of wisdom to the show. Is there anything that you want to, any parting thoughts that you want to leave with our listeners before we?
Let's do dinner soon. There's so much
Yes.
more. But the only parting thought out there is that I want all of you to listen. We're just in a whole new age of storytelling. And I think it's stuff like this podcast and other podcasts that are going where um, you're going to get so much more listening to people tell stories than you are to people trying to push an agenda or whatever the thing is, including myself. I include myself in that. But I am much wiser telling a story than anything else, partially because I think it's channeling, and so um, so stay on this channel because so far and coming up, there's so many guests that Jack's going to have that are people I love and respect and adore. Um,
Mm,
so let's keep this up. And
thank you. Thank you, Ted. Bless you.
all right, make wider circles.
There we are.